Well, welcome everyone. Week 10, Management Accounting. Looking today at decision making and relevant information. So my plan for today is to just walk through a handful of slides, just lay the foundations, and then the most helpful bit will be at the end where we work a few practical questions. And the key to this topic is just let's call it batting practice. The more practice we can get at solving questions, the better off we'll be. Uh, so this topic is we'll be looking at what are the 5 steps. What sort of decisions are we going to be making? We're going to cover this thing called the opportunity cost. Looking at things like, look, should we buy the component part from a supplier, or should we make it ourselves? All those sorts of constraints. And how do we solve bottlenecks when there's a particular part of the production process which is holding up other parts? How do we solve that? How do we get that sorted? And what's the implication of not getting it sorted? Some of them will be pretty obvious as we work through it. Right towards the end, we're going to look at a little bit of linear programming and solving simultaneous equations. So if you like practical problem solving, this topic is the one for you. Decisions like when should we replace equipment, and should we, when's the right time? What's the cost of continuing to repair the existing equipment versus buying new? So the steps, what's involved in the decision-making process? Fairly obvious, really, that we've got to identify what the issue is that we're trying to solve. And possibly some of the things here we'll talk even up front about employee morale. You know, when we talk about buying a component part or making it ourselves or shutting down a particular division, you know, you can put a dollar cost on the wages you'll save and all that sort of stuff. But how are you going to put a value on employee morale, on the employees that are left with you, and productivity and all that sort of thing? So anyway, identifying the problem. Then obviously the next step is gather all the information that is going to help us solve the problem. So gather the data. This is critical, that we want to make sure we gather the correct data. And really apply relevant data, relevant information. And then, you know, we'll be doing that by looking at what's happened in the past, as well as any other potential specifications and things we might have available. And then finally, you know, identify and make hopefully the best choice based on the data that we've gathered. Once we've implemented the decision, we really do need to review it. Sit back and look at it and see, was it the right decision? You know, do we need to readjust and gather some more data? It's an ongoing process, continually be working through. And obviously the benefits of getting it right are going to affect the bottom line, our profit essentially. So what's relevant and what's not relevant? Well, clearly relevant costs have to be something that we make a decision today and it's going to change costs into the future. It can't be anything that's happened in the past. A decision we made yesterday, the money we spent yesterday is gone. It has no impact whatsoever on what we do today. So always historical costs are sunk costs, also called sunk costs. Ignore them. So we've talked about these two issues: quantitative factors, where we can measure it, put a dollar value on it. Qualitative factors are a bit harder to measure and put a dollar value on. So, but we still need to consider them. Things like employee morale. You know, what value do you put on the quality of your product, or timely delivery, or customer satisfaction? We can use historical data as to help us make predictions for the future, but they are, apart from that, they are really irrelevant when gathering the data for the decisions we're about to make. They're helpful, a guide, but certainly we don't include them as part of the costs of the current decision. There's a couple of YouTube clips you could chase up on relevant costing and what's relevant. So if you have the time, we're worth looking at those. So some of the decisions we're making is also, should we take on a special order? Maybe we'll offer there's some sort of bulk, we've got some idle capacity, and we could offer some sort of bulk deal, a special price, with the implications being that it may open up another market that we were unaware of by taking on a special order. But clearly, if it's going to impact our existing customers and our existing supply chain, then we wouldn't take it on, and we certainly have to make sure we've got enough capacity before we went ahead with a decision like that. Now, I've just got to check that this is recording. We'll be back with you in a second. Yeah, it looks like it's rolling along okay, which is good. I have two laptops running, and one's just showing me that what I'm seeing on my screen is hopefully what you're seeing on your screen. Don't forget, at any stage you can maximize the screen up in the right-hand corner. If you flick on those little outward arrows, you'll get the maximum space. You'll be able to see the screen more clearly. Um, so the data, how are we going to produce it? Really, if we had, we've got a special order here, 5,000 additional units that we could sell for $11, bring in some extra revenue, and look, we'd look at the variable costs of producing that. We really, if fixed costs are going to, so here we are trying to do a little revenue statement, getting down to the operating profit. Using without the special order and then with the special order. And clearly, if there are certain costs, fixed costs that are going to stay the same, they're not going to increase if we take on this special order or not. So that's going to come into play when we work out the additional profit that is flowing in from this special order. And clearly, from the data that we've gathered there, without the order and with the order, we can see that profit is up by 17,500. So we do a little reconciliation there. And so just when you're coming to do these questions, I guess the key is pick up the relevant data, have some clerical accuracy, just work carefully through, and essentially you'll be comparing, profits or contribution margins, the bottom line, to work out whether a decision is viable or not. So this slide is letting us know that, look, just be careful when you are using unit cost. It can lead you astray a little bit. There's a time and a place for using unit costs when you're trying to do your calculations. Sometimes the best attempt, or the best method though, is to look at the big picture in total revenues and total costs. And then you get to, you could easily, it's this whole concept of what's going on with certain fixed costs at certain volume levels that are going to throw out and cause you potentially to make errors and miscalculate your potential profits or losses. Essentially, yeah, look, we're looking at the market. When we're making these decisions, we're trying to work out, will the market cope with extra production perhaps? If we've got to increase prices in the short run, what will the impact be on what's the quality of our product? So all of those sorts of things will come into play in our decision-making process. One of the things we do need to consider when we're trying to weigh up, do we make the product, the component part, or do we buy it from an outside supplier? The disadvantage of buying, imagine you're currently making it, you decide to go ahead and buy it from an outside supplier. The difficulty is you've closed down a division to make that happen, to save some costs, and now you're committed to buying from the supplier. And what happens is, if the quality of the product that he's supplying deteriorates, or the supplier goes bankrupt, or is late in delivery, all those sorts of issues. When you were making it, you didn't have those issues. You could control, the quality, or when you were making it yourself, and the delivery times and the costs. What if the supplier then increases the price after you're committed to buying from him and you've got rid of your manufacturing capacity? So all of these things need to be considered the reliability of the supply that you've decided to run with. Again, same sort of thing. When you're trying to work out whether to make or buy, you could pretty much, it's just grab the data, gather the data and cost it out and come down to, the bottom line. It looks like in this instance that it's going to cost us more once we've gathered the data to buy than it is to make it. Remembering that we don't have to include, there'll be certain fixed costs that, lease of plants and whatever fixed costs that whether we make it or buy it, we're committed to those fixed costs. So we're going to keep those out of the equation, keep them out of the calculation, because, yeah, I mean, yes, you could put it in both, and the bottom line will be the same that we'd still decide to make. So some people are interested in throwing it in both just to show that it is the true cost of making the product. But essentially, in terms of the decision, it really doesn't matter if you leave them out of both or put them in both. You're going to come up with the same conclusion. So all these sorts of considerations when you're deciding whether you should outsource either your component parts or whatever. We've talked about employee morale, the reputation of the supplier, any other things. If you're buying from overseas, what's the supply route like? What about if the exchange rate? And what about the international economy? All of these logistical considerations need to be considered. And yeah, what moral obligations or ethical obligations do you have to your community? What's the flow-on impact going to be if you shut down a particular division in an area? I think it's managers should consider the wider implications of their decision making beyond the bottom line and the profit. Opportunity cost is, you've probably seen that or talked about it in economics, and it's the same definition. It really is the cost when you spend some money doing something. The opportunity cost is the cost, the thing that you've missed out on doing, the next best thing that you could have otherwise used those funds, committed funds for. So it is still worth considering, okay, if I do this, what opportunities am I missing out on? And obviously you're going to go, you want to consider carefully what all of your options are in every decision making stage. What's this talking about? Yeah, look, just holding stock. Whenever you invest funds, immediately there's what else could you have done with those funds? There's an interesting concept too here in terms of stress. When you commit yourself, the cash flow. When you're committed, you're carrying stress. There's something about, I don't know, what value do you put on that? I mean, from a management point of view, and from shareholders looking in at the company, and they're trying to evaluate the risk, they will also be considering how risky that operation is. I'm not sure why I'm talking about that right now. Let's move on. Okay. So we will be looking at some capacity restraints, like there is certain limited resources in terms of our production capacity, and we're going to look at that when we come in to do, right towards the end, some linear programming work. The theory of constraints, we use that in our linear programming, where we're trying to maximize our profit and just try and work out all of the possible potential issues that might be caused along the way. So this is where the work to be performed, we're held up because we just don't have enough capacity, and so somewhere down the track we've got some idle time there, people not really being able to get on with their job because they're held back by lack of resources, lack of equipment, lack of parts. So we've got to really work hard to keep a nice, smooth operation. Let it just keep flowing nicely, and strikes can be outside your control, but can cause some of these bottleneck issues. So just have some sort of contingency plan available for managing how we're going to deal with bottlenecks when they do occur. What's the best action to keep our operation nice and efficient? So there will be times when maybe we have to ditch certain products and prioritize other products or services that really are providing a greater impact on the bottom line. Um, so so just try and manage our shifts. Yeah, just maximize the processing capabilities as best we can by just managing the shifts really well. So there's some practical day-to-day decisions that production managers and yeah can make in terms of keeping everything rolling along nicely. There are sometimes we might want to look closely at customers. We might spend a lot of our energy and time supporting a customer, and but yet they're not really contributing to the bottom line. And so there are times when maybe it's better to let some customers go and pick up some other customers. In this instance, this slide here is sort of showing us that, look, we're doing okay with Target and Kmart, but the poor old furniture warehouse here is, it's really, yes, they're bringing in $400,000 revenue, but is there somebody else that we could be selling that's not costing us as much? We've got this furniture handling with them that these guys don't have that's contributing a bit to those losses. They also will be sharing some of the fixed costs of the whole operation. So when we come in to calculate those losses, we'll really just make sure if we are going to incur the rent, whether we have the customer or not, leave them out of the equation. But it looks like when we've analysed how much revenue we're going to lose and the costs, it looks like if we dropped Furniture Warehouse, the effect on our profit would actually have just make sure I get this right, effect on operating profit loss. There would be a $15,000 loss by dropping the customer. Picking up this customer, we think they'll be contributing $6,000 profit. So it looks like it would be worth, if we could drop these guys and pick these guys up instead, we'll be able to, even though we're incurring this, we're going to have to write off some handling equipment, we'll be better off. That's my interpretation of the slide. It'll probably make more sense when we actually come to do some tutorial questions. You might want to reconsider that and disagree and suggest that the slide suggesting something else, but look through it, see if you can make sense of it. That's my best attempt at this point. So, yep, we're looking at if we do need to shut down, what else could we do? We might be able to salvage the employee morale, and there might be some better uses for them. Can we use them somewhere else in our organisation? That would be a bit of a sweetener to help the whole thing go ahead. People don't like change, and the threat of losing your job, and people like job security, and whenever there's change, generally there's a little bit of panic amongst your staff, and you want to try and minimize the impact of change for them, allow them to see it as a positive thing. They'll pick up though if it's not a genuine positive thing. People aren't silly. So you really do need to find the advantages for the firm and for your people. Take care of your people, I reckon it's a good thing. Well, again, this is a similar sort of scenario as the last one. I'm just trying to analyze which divisions, which division should we run with, maybe close one division that's not working so well and open another one in another location. Another YouTube clip you could chase up on activity-based costing and customer profitability. Again, remember that the carrying amount, the value of the asset on the balance sheet is irrelevant. It's linked to historical costs. What is relevant is what's the resale value of that asset if you choose to sell it. Let's have a look at which costs are relevant here. And I do apologize. I've just heard somebody at the front door. I might just give me 30 seconds to sort this. I'll literally run and I'll be back. I do apologise for that. It's just an unexpected visit and I thought I needed to get that sorted. So it's only 1 minute of your time. So thanks for bearing with me on that. Look, which of the following items are relevant? It just so happens that, what's the time? It's a 10 o'clock recording. Which of the following items are relevant and which are irrelevant in replacing the decision? So again, the carrying amount of the old machine, the loss on disposal, really they're accounting entries. They're irrelevant to whether you should buy a new machine or not. But what is relevant is what could you sell the old machine for and what is the cost of the new machine. So we'll get more practice at working out what's relevant and what's irrelevant in a minute. Okay, yeah, look, this is an interesting one. This paragraph here is suggesting that there are times management is going to get it wrong and they're going to perhaps take the wrong call, buy the wrong equipment, and yet what could happen is there could be a little bit of cover-up going on. Once they realize, uh-oh, that was a bad decision, they may be reluctant to sell it in a hurry because it reflects badly that they've made a mistake. So we've got this human factor coming into decision making that people trying to cover up and may not necessarily be acting in the best interests of the firm. So yeah, even delaying needed equipment maintenance just so they get a nice little bonus in their division, perhaps there would be some incentive possibly for managers to do that. Another web link or YouTube link that if you want to chase that up, the equipment replacement decision. Well, not long to go now. We're just going to walk through what I call linear programming and we'll walk through this question. There's a couple of other questions towards the end and then we'll look at some tutorial questions. What's happening here, we've got this company, they've got two brands of biscuits. This particular Della Delight and another one, Bonnie's Bourbon. They go through different departments. Bonnie's Bourbon is the only one that needs to go through the filling department. And we've got a maximum 270 minutes available in the filling department and Bonnie's Bourbon needs 15 minutes. So we've immediately got a constraint, a time constraint here, if you like, resource constraint for the filling department. Let's look at baking. Della's Delight needs 10 minutes in the baking department. Bonnie's Bourbon needs 15 minutes, and the total number of minutes available in the baking department, 300. Mixing department, slightly bigger it seems, 660 minutes available. Della's needs 30 minutes in mixing, and Bonnie's only 15. So with these constraints, we're going to try and work out what's the best mix of these two products. And it will depend a little bit on the revenue that they generate as well. So the Della's biscuit, slightly $50, slightly higher contribution margin for every biscuit that we sell. And so really, again, these monthly allocated fixed costs, they are allocated fixed costs. They really are irrelevant to the decision mix. So we're going to leave those out of the equation, out of the question. So what we can do, we're going to try and write some constraints. So if the mixing department, if Della needs 30 minutes and Bonnie's needs 15 minutes and the total is 660, we can write an equation and say, look, 30 times D, 30 lots of D, and 15 plus 15 lots of B can't exceed, equals, if you like, equals, can be less than, but equals 660. And in the baking department, 10 lots of D and 15 lots of B, Bonnie's, has to equal 300. So let's look at the constraints on the next page. The equation we're trying to maximize is the contribution margin, 300 for Della, 250 for Bonnie's bourbon biscuit. So that's what we're trying to maximize. And what are the constraints? 30 lots of Della plus 15 lots of Bonnie's equals 660. So the equal sign's missing there. I do apologize on this slide. And this one is saying for the filling department, there is no Della, it's all Bonnie. So 15 lots of Bonnie can't exceed 270. 15B has to equal 270. And the last equation is from the baking department. 10 lots of Della, 15 lots of Bonnie has to equal 300. So and that should be an equal sign there. So we've got the third equation. And the next thing is when you look at each of these straight lines, they're not exponential. These variables, it's not d cubed or b, to the fourth. They're just a raised to the power of 1. So that lets me know it's a straight line. Each one of these lends itself to being solved. And that's why it's called linear programming, because we can draw a line and try and solve it. So what we need to do then is draw each of the constraints. So the technique is, let's put, doesn't matter which biscuit goes where. Let's imagine we decided to put Bonnie's biscuit on the y-axis and Della's here. And all of our options, we either produce none of Della and all of Bonnie, or all of Bonnie and none of Della, I'll get this right, all of Della and none of Bonnie. So that will help us work out, we can start to draw some of these constraints and look at all of the potential combinations of how many biscuits of Della versus how many biscuits of Bonnie should we produce. So let's start drawing the constraints. Let's see how we might go about that. Well, the first thing, it's pretty easy. Really, all you need to do if both of the products are involved is say, well, look, if we produce none of Bella, 0 lots of 15, that becomes 0. Then how many lots of Della could we produce? So the mixing constraint, the dot, when Bella equals 0, we'll just go 30 into 660 will tell me how many lots of Della I can produce. So let's go and have a look at how we draw the mixing department line. Make sure we put a 0 for one of the products in and work out what the maximum is. To get the other dot on the line, just pretty much do the reverse. So righto, let's make Della 0. 15's into 60, 660. How many lots of Bella could I, or Bonnie's, could I make? And the answer, 45. Just going there again. 660 divided by 15. Whoops, wrong way. So we pretty much only need 2 dots to be able to draw the line. We've got the slope and we've got the intercept of both axes. We do exactly the same for the baking department. We go back and we look at the baking department constraints. What if Della was, I keep getting the biscuits mixed up. Anyway, imagine Della was 0. How many lots of Bella could we make? 300 divided by 15. And then reverse. What if Bella was 0? How many lots of... Let's do this one. This will be easy for us. If Bella... Is it Bella? Bonnie! If Bonnie is 0, then Della would become 30. Let's see if we can see that on the baking department line. Bonnie is 0. Bonnie is 0. Baking department should be sitting, there it is, sitting at 30. So we've got that point and we're able to draw that line. The last constraint is the filling department constraint. Pretty much 15's into 270 tells me the maximum we could achieve with the Bonnie's product, and there it is there. That line, that's the maximum we can produce of Bonnie. So now we've got a shape emerging as we go out from 0. We could fill in within the constraints pretty much all of those combinations could exist. We could produce none of Bonnie and all of Della, none of Della and all of Bonnie. That would give us that point there. So we can pretty much, and then, or we could do this mix. In fact, we could do any of the mixes. And of course, the closer we are to 0, then the smaller our profit's going to be. You only sell a minimal amount. So obviously, as you push out, the further you move away from your 0 mark, you're maximizing your profit. And the mathematicians that have studied examples have discovered that, look, the best solution, the maximum solution is at the points, the furthest points from 0. We're not sure where it could occur. It depends on the mix of the contribution margin. So it could be at that point there, could be that point there, could be that point there, it could be that point there. Well, this point here is pretty easy to pick, 0 and 22 and 0 and looks like 17. We can work those points out pretty easily, pretty quickly, just from our equations. These are a little bit hard. This one's a little bit harder to find. Where do these two lines cross? The pink and the blue, the baking and the mixing department line. Where do they cross? So we use a sequence of solving simultaneous equations. They've made life pretty easy for us. If we wanted to find where the mixing department and the baking department lines crossed, could write the two equations out and just subtract them from each other. So 30D minus 10D is 20D, 15B minus 15B is 0, 660 minus 300 is 360. So now D must equal 360 divided by 20. So we get D equals 18. All we've got to do now is put that D equals 18 back into the second equation to solve for B. So 10 lots of 18 plus 15 lots of B equals 300. 180 plus 15B equals 300. Subtract 180 from both sides to leave 15B over here. So we get 15B equals 300 minus 180. 15B equals 120 then. 120 divided by 15 will give me my A. So we know that that point, B, when Bella is 8, Della can be 18, and we know that that is that point right there. When Della is 18, Bella is 8. We've got that point, 18, 8. Notice that the number that comes first is always the x-axis when you're identifying points. There's the x, and there's the y. Okay, so once we've identified it, using that same technique with the rest of our equations, solving for the other points, I'll get you to chase up later on how you would solve that, but it's solving in a very similar way. We're trying to find this point here. Where does that line and the filling line cross? Using the same technique down here. Once we've done that, we pretty much just plug in the data, plug in a range. Well, what if we did produce 0 lots of Della and 0 lots of Bonnies? Clearly the revenue is going to be 0, $300 per unit. We're selling nothing, so it's 0. What about if we went up to one of these corners and sold 22 lots of Della and 0 lots of Bonnies? What would our revenue look like then? So obtain gather Della's contribution margin 300. That should say times 22 units. Of course, we're selling none of the bonnies, so that's 0. So we've got a total revenue of 6,600. We keep doing that for each of them, and it looks like the highest revenue is this one here, where the mixing and the baking department line cross. When we sell 18 lots of Della, 8 lots of bonnies, that's 300 times 18 plus 250 times 8 gives me 7,400. We've maximized the revenue. So there it is. That's a very quick whiz-bang look through linear programming, how it's designed. Step 1, gather the data, look at your constraints, generate your equations, your constraint equations, solve them to find out where they cross, where the points are, and then apply each of the points of the constraints to work out which one gets the best income. Here's another example. If you wanted to follow it through, it's got all the data that we need, very similar to the last one, and I won't follow it through now. You can have a look through when you look through the slides yourselves. But here we're using Excel's solver. I've got an Excel sheet that we can show you when we get together in class, where pretty much you can enter the constraints, enter all of the data, enter the profit formula that you're trying to maximize. What are you trying to maximize? Set that objective to B24, maximizing the profit. And once Excel knows what you're trying to what your profit is, and knows where your constraints are, that this plus this has to, or this has to be less, this has to be less than the 700, away it goes. It puts it in a loop rather than solve it simultaneously. It just keeps crunching the numbers, putting them around and around in a loop until it finds the maximum solution. It just keeps changing the options here randomly, just because it's lots and lots of iterations to make it solve it using trial and error. So this is how you would find the solver option in Excel, how to open it. It's an add-in feature, so it may not be in your Excel spreadsheet. If you haven't already added it, you just have to go File, Options, Add-in Solver, and it's an Excel solver. Look for Excel on the screen down the bottom, press OK, it'll load, and you'll be able to work through the question. We'll do a little bit of this in class, and here's a little bit more of us manually solving the equations. So if you wanted to practice up how to solve simultaneous equation, there's a range of options for you to follow. Look, I just wanted to finish the last 10 minutes. I'm just going to check my recording's still okay. Yep, I wanted to finish the last just 10 minutes or so, giving you a look at the sorts of questions we will be looking at when we come into class. So the first question is, do we keep or drop a business segment? This particular business segment has a contribution margin of 35. If we drop the segment, we'll be able to save $30,000 in fixed costs. But even if we drop the segment, we'll still have these unavoidable fixed costs. So whether we drop it or not, really that $25,000 becomes irrelevant. So what is relevant is these two figures, and we can see that, look, we are better off staying with the segment. It's contributing 35. It's only really costing us, it's only going to save us 30,000 if we drop it. We're better off keeping it. Our contribution margin exceeds the avoidable fixed costs. Oops, sorry, I've gone too far. Come back. Okay, next question. We're thinking of getting into a new market, expanding in. Which costs are relevant? Sunk costs? No, they're not. They're historical, they're gone, leave it out. Variable costs, yes. And we do want to consider the opportunity costs. What else could we have done? If we don't go ahead with this decision, what other opportunities are we missing out on? What about this question here? We've got a company, they've got some old stock, a missile in fact, it's been discontinued, it's irrelevant that it cost us $76,000. It's worth $76,000. It's worth nothing if it's discontinued and it has no value on the market. But what we can do is we can either remachine it at a cost of $26,500, and then it will have some value in it. And when it does, by spending that much money, we'll be able to bring in this much money. Or we can sell it as it is for scrap for $2,500, which is better. So we just outline the two options. Sell it for scrap. We're going to bring in $2,500. Don't have to spend anything. What if we remachine it? We'll be able to bring in $33,000 worth of revenue. But it's going to cost us $26,500. We are better off by getting it sorted, getting it back on the market for $33,500. We'll be $7,000 better off. Remember, ignore the 76. It's 76,000. It's irrelevant. It's sunk. It's gone. This is the relevant data here. Oops, I keep scrolling the wrong way. Another one, truck cost this much, $100,000. It's uninsured, unfortunately crashed on the first day, and we can either sell it as it is for $18,000 cash, scrap it basically, and buy a new truck for $103,000, or we could rebuild it for $88,500, and pretty much it would be brand new as far as the operating characteristics are concerned. Sorry, there's a bit of building going on, and a truck just went by. Okay. So which action is going to be less costly? So what we could do is just go, well, let's see, what's it going to cost us to rebuild it? It's going to cost us $88,500. What about the new cost? The new cost truck is going to cost $103,000, but we can trade in the scrap truck for parts or whatever for $18,000. So it's going to cost us $85,000. So clearly, in this instance, we're better off buying the new truck. Yes, you can't do anything about the fact that the old truck was worth $105,000 and it's uninsured, gone, sunk. Too bad. Doesn't affect the current. What's in front of us right now is this decision now. Either spend a further $85,000 or spend a further $88,000. $85,000's better, so run with the replace option. One last question. We have an option here. We are making a circuit board. It cost us this much. The variable cost per unit is, so that's the same truck going out of our street and is almost gone. Great. Variable cost 190 and fixed cost per unit is 90. There's another supplier who's offered to provide the same product for 260. And if we do decide to go and buy it from him, we will save $10 in fixed costs. But no matter what we do, whether we buy it or make it, we're still going to be up for $80 of those $90 fixed costs. So let's see what the calculation looks like now. Clearly, if we choose to buy it, the cost to us will be $260. Now, what does it cost us to make it? Well, the relevant cost for us is $190, and but it is costing us this extra $10, which we could save if we went for the buy option. So it is actually costing us that additional $10. But the unavoidable fixed cost, the $80, really doesn't come into play in the buy option, because it's there whether we buy or sell. We can leave it out of the question, leave it out of the equation. So to make it is $200, to buy it $260. Clearly, it's better in this instance with the data that we have to make it rather than buy it. So hopefully that helps. We'll really do a lot more of those questions when we get back together in class. I'm going to stop the recording now and look forward to catching up with you, where we'll get to work through quite a few more questions. As I said,